In a burned patch of Amazon forest on Tanguro Ranch in Mato Grosso, Brazil, a scientist named Lucas Paolucci is on his knees in the ash, breaking apart a pile of manure. Around him, blackened trunks, a broken canopy, sunlight where shade should be. Humans set these fires on purpose, year after year, to watch a forest fail. Paolucci came to measure the damage. Instead, he found something nobody predicted. That burned ground was receiving 3 times more seeds per hectare than the untouched forest next door, delivered by an animal we hunt for meat. Nobody had put it there. Start with the place because the place is strange enough on its own. Tanguro is a working soy farm in southeastern Mato Grosso, sitting on the frayed southern edge of the Amazon at 13 degrees south. On one side of the fence, machines. Straight rows, dust, harvest. On the other side, forest, and inside that forest, 3 rectangles of land that researchers from the Amazon Environmental Research Institute and Woods Hole had been treating like a patient in an experiment nobody would be allowed to run today. They set the forest on fire. Deliberately. One plot burned nearly every year between 2004 and 2010. A second plot burned every 3 years. A third plot was left alone, untouched as the control. The point was not cruelty. The point was to answer a question that matters for the whole basin. What actually happens to an Amazon forest when fire keeps creeping through the understory? Because that is not a hypothetical. That is what the Amazon's dry edges look like now, cut, fragmented, dried out, and burning at low intensity over and over, in ways the wet interior almost never did. So the science teams went in expecting a funeral. Fire kills the thin-barked trees. The canopy opens. Grass and vines move in. The forest thins towards something scrubbier, hotter, more flammable. And the assumption baked into all of it was simple. A burned, broken forest is an abandoned forest. The animals leave. Nothing brings the seeds back. That assumption is where the story breaks. Paolucci's team walked the plots looking for tapir dung. Not glamorous work. Boots, gloves, sieves, a tray, a notebook, ash on everything. They mapped every clump they found across a 150-hectare survey and pinned each one to a GPS point. Then they broke the clumps apart and sieved the seeds out by hand. The numbers came out absurd. 163 dung clumps. And inside them, counted one by one, 129,204 seeds from 24 plant species. Now here is the first punch. Over 99% of those seeds came through undamaged, not crushed, not ground to pulp, intact and still capable of germinating. And the piles were not evenly spread. They were concentrated in the burned plots, the dead ground, the plots that were supposed to be empty. The burned forest was not abandoned, it was busier. Sit with that for a second, because it should not make sense. If fire wrecks a forest, why would a 250-kilogram animal choose the wreck over the healthy woods next door? To answer that, you have to stop looking at what the fire destroyed and start looking at what the forest had already lost, long before anyone struck a match. Here is the part almost everyone misses. When people picture the Amazon, they picture abundance. Green, thick, humming. What is actually standing across huge stretches of the basin is a forest that still has most of its trees and has quietly lost most of its movers. A tropical forest is not just a pile of vegetation. It is a delivery network. Big trees make big fruit with big seeds, and those seeds cannot walk. They need to be eaten, carried, and dropped somewhere else. Monkeys do it. Large birds do it. Rodents do it. Tapirs do it. Take those animals out, through hunting, roads, fragmentation, fire, and the trees stay standing while the trucks disappear. Nothing looks broken. Everything is broken. Then the fire comes through and it takes the canopy. And with the canopy go the arboreal animals that lived in it, which means the big-seeded, slow-growing, carbon-heavy trees lose their last ride. Seeds can still land where they fall. They just cannot travel. And a forest that cannot move its seeds is a forest that gets stuck with brush, vines, grass, a scrubby low ceiling that burns again in 5 years. The soil was fine, the rain was fine. The stumps were alive and re-sprouting. The seeds hadn't stopped growing, they had stopped arriving. That is the bottleneck, not fertility, not water, arrival. Which brings us to the animal. The lowland tapir is the largest land mammal in South America. Up to about 2.5 meters long, up to 1/4 of a ton, with a stubby, prehensile snout and a body plan that looks like a design committee argued and gave up. It is related to horses and rhinos. It swims, it walks kilometers a night. It eats fruit whole, big seeds included, and moves them far from the parent tree before depositing them in a warm pile of fertilizer. In Brazil, people have a name for it: gardener of the forest. Here is the ugly part. The gardener is listed as vulnerable by the IUCN. It breeds slowly, one calf at a time, long gestation, years to replace an adult. It is hunted for meat across much of its range. It is exactly the kind of animal that vanishes first from fragmented, road-cut, burned-over country. So the forest's repairman is on the endangered list, and until recently, almost nobody had bothered to measure what he was actually doing in the places that needed repair, because the science had gone the other way. Study after study on seed dispersal happened in pristine forest, the intact stuff, the postcard stuff, and the work that had been done on damaged forest pointed to loss. Burned forests and forest edges lose animal-fruit interactions. Fruit eaters thin out. The reasonable prediction, the one Paolucci's team went in holding, was that tapirs would avoid the burns like everything else. The prediction failed, and the failure mattered because of what it revealed. Meanwhile, on the human side, there was a much bigger and much more expensive failure sitting in plain sight. Brazil has committed to restoring forest at a scale measured in millions of hectares. The default image of restoration is a nursery, a truck, a tray of seedlings, and a line of people planting them by hand. It works. It also costs money per hectare forever, and it does not scale to a burned frontier the size of a European country. In cleared lowlands, hand-planted seedlings often get smothered by aggressive grasses before they ever reach the light. So on one side you have humans pricing the rebuild of the Amazon in budgets and seedlings. On the other side, out in a burned plot on a soy farm, an animal was doing the job for free, and the numbers were about to get embarrassing. Here is the mechanism, and it is beautifully stupid in its simplicity. Fire burns through the understory and kills the thin-barked trees. The canopy opens. Sunlight, which almost never reaches the floor of a closed rainforest, suddenly hits the ground. The surviving stumps and roots respond the way plants always respond to light. They push. Resprouts, seedlings, soft leafy growth, all of it low, all of it within reach of a big animal's mouth. A burned forest, from a tapir's point of view, is not a graveyard. It is a salad bar. So the tapirs walk in. Camera traps strapped to scorched trunks caught them in the burned plots roughly twice as often as in the closed, unburned forest. They were not passing through by accident. They were choosing it and staying. And an animal that spends more time somewhere leaves more behind. More hours in the burn means more dung in the burn. Each pile is a package, seeds swallowed elsewhere in intact forest, carried across the landscape in a gut and dropped into ground that is now full of light. They don't plant a tree. They deliver a package, seed, fertilizer, and a location the seed could never have reached on its own. Now the numbers, because this is where it stops being a nice idea and starts being a measurement. In the unburned control plot, Paolucci's team estimated tapirs were depositing around 2,950 seeds per hectare per year. In the plot, burned every 3 years, about 8,587. In the plot that had been burned nearly every year, about 11,057. Read that ladder again. The seed delivery did not just survive the damage, it climbed with the damage. Averaged across the burned plots, roughly 9,822 seeds per hectare per year, against about 2,950 in the healthy forest next door. That is the 3 times more. That is the headline. and it was published in the journal Biotropica in February 2019, peer-reviewed, under a title that sounds calm and isn't. Lowland tapirs facilitate seed dispersal in degraded Amazonian forests. Could it be a fluke? A few tapirs wandering in circles? That is the obvious objection, and the team had already gone around it from a completely different angle. Aircraft flew the site with LiDAR, firing laser pulses down through the canopy to map its three-dimensional structure. Every hole, every gap, every thinned patch. Then they compared the canopy map to the dung map. The pattern held. The more open the canopy, the more dung on the ground beneath it. Two independent instruments, a camera trap and a laser, telling the same story. The animals were tracking the damage, which produces a sentence that sounds like a contradiction and isn't. The damage is what attracts the repairman. The same fire that ruined the canopy is the fire that grew the food that pulled the tapirs in. So does that mean fire is good? No, hold on, because now we have to do the honest part, and the honest part is more interesting than the hype. Seeds are not trees. Nobody at Tangaro followed those 129,204 seeds through germination, through the seedling stage, through the years of drought and shade and being chewed on to see how many became trees. That was not what the study measured. And most of the seeds in that dung were small-seeded species, not the giant hardwoods people picture when they think carbon. If you came here for the claim that tapirs regrew a burned Amazon, the science does not say that, and I'm not going to say it either. But look at what it does say, because it's arguably stronger. Restoration has two problems: getting seeds to the right place and getting them to survive. Hand planting solves the first problem at enormous cost. Tapirs solve the first problem for nothing, at a scale no nursery can touch, targeting precisely the degraded ground that needs seeds most, and they arrive with the seed pre-packed in fertilizer. Scientific American put it bluntly: putting tapirs to work, doing what they already do best, may be the cheapest route to large-scale tropical forest restoration. Not the only route, the cheapest one. They won't do the job alone. They lower the bill. And then the story gets stranger, because the seeds do not just sit there on top of the dung, waiting for a rodent to find them and eat them. Dung beetles arrive. They roll the manure, break it up, and bury it, and the seeds inside go down with it. Buried, hidden from seed predators, sitting in fertilizer. The tapir delivers, the beetle plants. Two species running a supply chain we were quoting in millions of dollars, and nobody was paying either of them. Paolucci has been clear about what happens if that chain breaks. If tapirs fail to thrive, he told Science News, seed dispersal is expected to rely even more on organisms such as dung beetles, smaller animals, moving smaller seeds, shorter distances. The forest that regrows from that is not the forest we lost. It is a lighter, thinner, more flammable version of it. Which is exactly why the last part of this matters. Because once you understand that a tapir is not just a charismatic animal, but a piece of working infrastructure, an obvious question follows. What happens if you put them back where they've been wiped out? People are doing it. In Rio de Janeiro state, lowland tapirs had been gone for around 100 years. Extinct. An entire generation of Brazilians grew up in that forest with no idea that something the size of a small horse used to walk through it, moving seeds. That is the damaged baseline in one sentence. The forest looked normal because nobody alive remembered the version with the gardener in it. Then, in 2017, the Rafana Project and the Guapiacu Ecological Reserve began releasing tapirs back into the Atlantic forest there. Animals from breeding centers, fitted with tracking collars, eased out through acclimation pens rather than dumped into the trees. In Iberá, in Argentina, another team translocated 11 adults between 2016 and 2018. And in 2020, the reserve in Rio recorded something that had not happened in that state in over a century. a wild-born tapir calf. Striped, spotted, small, walking through forests that had been missing its seed carrier for 100 years. Nobody planted that. Nobody funded that calf's future work. It just started walking. Now the limitation, because this is the part that makes the whole story believable instead of just loud. Tangaro worked for a reason that has nothing to do with ecology and everything to do with people. Paolucci said it plainly. They worked on a privately owned farm, there is no hunting there, so the animals are quite common. And he immediately added the warning that this is not the reality for other regions of Brazil, especially the Atlantic forest, where most Brazilians actually live. So the honest version is this. The tapirs did not save that burned forest because tapirs are magic. They did it because that particular patch of burned forest happened to sit inside a place where nobody shot them. Take away that one condition and the whole mechanism collapses. No tapirs, no delivery, no seeds, and the burned forest sits there in the light, growing grass, waiting for the next fire. And tapirs cannot outrun fire anyway. They are a head start, not a fire brigade. Burn the same ground every year and you kill what the seeds become. They breed, slowly, one calf, years apart. You cannot mass produce them. You can only stop killing them. That is the leverage, not force, not budget, just the removal of one bottleneck in one place and then letting a system that already knows what to do get on with it. So go back to the ash. A man on his knees in a burned Amazon plot on the edge of a soy farm, breaking apart manure with gloved hands, counting seeds into a tray while a harvester runs 3 fields away. He went in to document a forest dying. He came out having documented a delivery service, 163 piles, 129,204 seeds, over 99% of them intact, arriving in the deadest ground at 3 times the rate of the living forest, carried in by an animal we have spent centuries treating as meat. Nobody released those tapirs, nobody trained them, funded them, or told them where to go. They walked in because the fire made lunch. We spent decades pricing the rebuild of the rainforest, nurseries, seedlings, trucks, hectares, budgets, and the whole time, the thing that could do a huge share of it, for free, was standing in the smoke, chewing. For years, people looked at that animal and saw dinner. The forest had been using it as infrastructure,